afternoon and good morning to some. Thank you all for joining. We're going to give a couple more minutes, let people join in, and we'll be right with you guys. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you all for taking time out of your day to join our webinar here about the updates to CMMC. What's changed, what hasn't, and what's next. So today, the introductions are myself, Ken Barnaby. I'm our regional sales manager here with IGI Cybersecurity, and Wayne Proctor, our VP of Services. Got a lot to cover today. We do have an hour, but we're hoping to get through within about 45 minutes. But please, if anybody has any questions, utilize the chat box, and we will address them as they come in. So try to make this as interactive as we can. And again, thank you. And I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Proctor to get this thing rolling. Hey, Wayne.
Hey, everybody. Glad you're able to join today. I think we got some really good content for you to understand fully the situation with the CMMC Phase II pause. So hopefully after this, you'll have a really good appreciation, but do enter any questions like Ken said, so we can go over those at the end of the discussion. And feel free to give us a call if you need to after that. But I think you're going to have a good picture of what's happening with CMMC after this. So this first slide is information before. So what was the situation before the pause? Where were we? And I think this will help you to appreciate all the things that were going on and why having the pause will really allow the DoD to do some reassessment. So the situation was, just before the pause, that we had roughly 4 months before the start of Phase II. And Phase II was really the start of requiring third-party C3 PAO assessments to be required in DoD contracts. They weren't all going to start. That was the start of the rollout. So you may have not, if you were trying to get DoD contracts, you may get several contracts that didn't have that clause in it, but that's when the requirements were going to start. Also, we had about 2,000 contractors that are CMMC Level 2 certified. Sounds like a pretty big number, but remember that the DoD, since the beginning of the CMMC, they were estimating that there were roughly about 80,000 companies that would need Level 2 certification. So it's about 2.5% of the companies that had to be certified eventually at Level 2 have already been certified. So that's a pretty small percentage. We also had a situation where we had just over 1,000 assessors that were CCAs, and you need a minimum of three CCAs to be involved in an assessment. Although, to keep in mind, there was a survey done in a recent Cyber AB town hall where they asked all the CCAs on the call, are you going to be doing assessments? And it was a little under half of the CCAs that were on the call were actually going to be doing assessments. So we can't, really say for sure how many CCAs there are out of those 1,000 that would be doing assessments, but we know that a good portion of those assessors were really CCAs more for helping their internal companies or doing readiness. So say we had a situation closer to 500 CCAs available. We also had prime contractors. We know the vast majority of DoD contracting firms are not prime contractors, but the primes have the contract with the DoD, and the subcontractors, who are much bigger in number, they have their contracts with the prime contractors as part of the larger deal that the prime has with the government. So the prime contractors have been telling and putting more and more pressure on their subs to say, you guys need to be compliant if you're going to stay part of, as one of my subcontractors. So that was another pressure coming to the industry. It's not just the start of the CMMC Phase II, it's also the prime saying, when you got to be ready if you're going to be part of my ecosystem. Then we also had, about a month ago, there was a proposed rule put out there. It is a public comment period for the FAR CUI proposed rule. That's a rule for all of the federal agencies, not just the DoD, but for all the federal agencies to have in their contracts after this rule is finalized that they need to be compliant. If they have CUI, they need to be compliant with the NIST 800-171, but they said Rev 3, and CMMC is currently based on Rev 2. And I don't have any slides here to go into what that really means, but there's over 100 new objectives in the level 3. So it's more complexity, more things to assess. And then CMMC came out, I think this was just like 2 weeks ago, CMMC came out with a rule modification being proposed that they wanted to also move to level 3. It may not get there until maybe, middle next year, but still they wanted to move, so that's more change. So what this picture is trying to show you is that, overall, there's not a high percentage of companies that would be certified by the mid-November date, and there's a lot of change and uncertainty. So that's kind of the picture where we were before we had the DOW announce their pause for the Phase II. Can you go to the next slide, Ken? All right, so this is kind of a summary of what's been announced in that period about a week ago. So we had it announced that the mid-November Phase II rollout, which is basically just the rollout of saying some contracts are now going to require the Phase II C3PO certification. That's been suspended. So for at least 60 days, but we don't know really how long that's suspended, if it comes back, when it comes back, how it's going to be rolled out to what companies. So those are some of the questions we're going to discuss in this presentation. But that's what was announced, that just the rollout in contracts of requiring a C3PO certification for level 2 has been delayed. And all future milestones were stopped. And that's basically those milestones in the future. But, the Phase II is really the focus. That stopped, but they're just making mention that other milestones in the future are also on pause. So what I have highlighted here, and I think this is really the meat of what's really happening here, the DOW has formed a CMMC reform task force to just do an overall consideration of the CMMC program. Are any needed changes out there that should be recommended that could maybe impact how the program moves forward in the future? And what was mentioned was simplification, keeping the same levels of security in place to protect the CUI and the FCI, but to have it in a more simple manner that's more easily achieved. And also, they said that the solicitations, so if they're making bids, asking companies to try to win new contracts with them, if they say in there that they're going to require level 2 certification or level 3 certification, those are going to be amended so they no longer require that certification. And if there's any existing contracts out there, and there are some that already say that level 2 certification is required, those are going to be modified by the procurement officers so they no longer say that. So we're basically just, for right now, during this pause period, taking out those requirements to have certification by a third party or a C3 PAO.
Hey, Wayne,
yeah.
I'm gonna, real quick, why do you think that is? Why do you think they paused this?
Well, they really want to do a reevaluation. A lot of you have probably seen the news, but overall, there's an initiative headed by Pete Hegseth saying that they want to be able to expand the capabilities of the defense for the nation. And they thought that CMMC was an administrative barrier to that. So they definitely want to make sure that all the security is in place, but can the program be more efficient? Can it be modified in any way? So they're basically looking to see how they can get the security in place and have less overhead.
Got it.
So the last thing I have on the slide, and we're going to talk a bit more about this, but that certification rollout is all that was changed or delayed for now. But all the security requirements are still required. So in the level 1 and level 2 self-assessments are fully required. Nothing's changed. So keep that in mind, that self-certifications have no changes at all. Okay, so here's just a little more information about why level 1 and level 2 compliance still matters. And keep in mind what we said was that the changes really are only to the rollout of the certifications being required. But the FAR requirements for FCI to have the baseline security elements put in place has been in contracts since June of 2016. And that's really the same requirements as CMMC level 1, the very same security controls. So that's nothing new. If you have a contract and you signed a contract saying that you have the baseline security in place and you don't, I mean, you could have had the False Claims Act fines for the last 10 years. So that's in place, still in place, no change whatsoever. So as far as compliance with NIST 800-171, that's what this DFAR 7012 rule requires, is that put into contracts for the DOW, all those contracts since 2016, any new requirements or any new contracts that rolled out have had that requirement that you need to be compliant. So if you're a contractor, you signed any contract since December of 2016 with the DOW, then you've already said that you have those security in place. So, nothing's changing at all with the requirements. So the CMMC program, that's really just adding a verification, because some companies did sign that they had those security requirements in place, but they actually didn't. So CMMC, really the whole program is about how to verify that those controls are really in place. So prime contractors, if you're the subcontractor, you sign your contract with the prime, not with the DoD. So any of the requirements to be compliant that are stated in the prime contracts are still all in effect. There's no change. So if your prime is requiring you to have a certification by a certain date, that's still a requirement, even if the government had a pause. So that's something, we're going to talk about that a little more coming up, but that's something to definitely keep in mind, that if you have a contract with a prime, you have to find out about your obligations to the prime, regardless of this pause. And the False Claims Act, we just mentioned it a little bit ago, but if you sign those contracts and you're billing the government and you're not fully compliant, then you could very easily have a suit against you for under the False Claims Act and have penalties.
And Wayne, that False Claims Act, that goes all the way back to 2016, right? It's not going forward. It's if they've said they've done this from the last decade, there could be fines if they come in there and they say, hey, you said you did this back in 2018 and you haven't done anything.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the impacts of that on another slide, but it is, you know, a real thing. Actually, just I think it was last month it was announced that a contractor got fined, or they paid a settlement of about $500,000 because they claimed they put in a SPURS score as if they were totally compliant. They had a 110, which is a perfect score. But when they were assessed, I guess it, and I don't have the details, but it could have been a whistleblower that said, oh, these guys aren't really compliant. They had an assessment and it was found out that they had a lot of controls missing. And because of that, they had to pay that $500,000 fine.
Jeez. Okay.
Oh, this is the next slide to talk about that. That's a good lead-in. So this is for anybody that doesn't know about the False Claims Act and what it really means. I'll try to go through this quickly. But if you sign that contract that says that you're compliant with the 800-171 requirements or even the baseline security requirements, and you're not, then that's a false claim. And you could be held to some of these penalties. The first penalty is civil penalty, and there's a fine per claim. And what that really means is that this amount here, like $13,000 to $28,000, could be charged to you per claim. And a false claim is basically every time that you billed the government and got paid. So each time they count that as a false claim. So like Ken said, if you've been doing that for quite a while, that can add up to quite an amount. But on top of that, some of the bigger charges can be these treble damages. So basically, you could have to pay triple the government damages. And the government damages could be how much you paid them. So if you charge a government over a period of time $1 million, you may be fined $3 million. And it's not as black and white as I'm making it sound. There's differences based upon the situation, but that's what the law is based on, the 3-time damages. And then also you could have suspension from getting future contracts. So it's not just a money penalty, but it's ongoing removal of all your revenue from the DOW. And basically there's a system called the Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System, where if you have any kind of violation like this, they log this in their system. And what the procurement officers are supposed to be doing before they award any contract, just look in the CPAR system to see if there's any negative comments about the contractor. And if they see that you had a False Claims Act in there, you may go to the bottom of the list for getting that contract awarded to you. So that's could be even a bigger penalty in the long run. And if you guys haven't heard about whistleblower, basically whistleblowers are the people that report you as not having the right security in place. And that could be your own competitors could be reporting you. And, they would, in some cases, if you have stiff competition, that may be something that they, might do in some situations, or disgruntled employees, ex-employees. Anyone can really report you, and they get 15 to 30% of the total recovery from the government. So in that case of, if you had to pay $3 million in fines, you know, if they're getting almost $1 million as their profit margin, that's a pretty good reason for a whistleblower to report you. So there's a real incentive. Okay, this next slide, I don't want to read very much into it, but I did want to mention it because this is also something that was announced by the DOW the same day as they announced a pause. But they said, here is a model called Brilliant at the Basics that then there's two different models. I'm just showing, I think, the IT one here, but there's an IT security model and an OT security model. And in both models, they show top 10 controls that they feel are the most important to implement. And these are the security basics for either IT or OT. And there's no tie that's been reported about between this and CMMC. The only feeling I have is that these basic controls are ones that if you don't have in place, you should really focus on getting these in place. These are all part of CMMC controls, but I think what they're saying is, you know, here's some controls that, you know, really you should prioritize if you don't have these in place, because these are some of the most important controls. So I have a link there if you want to go check that out more. But that's just something to be aware of, that, you know, DoD is actually saying, here is some controls that you should take notice of and make sure you have in place. Okay. All right, so this is something where I think it really gets interesting. So I had highlighted in the beginning of this presentation that really I think the core here, the most important thing for us to keep our eyes on is this task force. So they're looking at the entire CMMC program and seeing if there's any ways to become more efficient. And they are saying very clearly they don't want to have reductions in security. They just want to see how the program can be more efficient. So when the task force came out, one of the very first things they did was issue an RFI saying we want feedback from the public about how we could improve this CMMC program or what you see as problems. And I'm not going to go through all these questions, but these questions I've listed here are actually a set of questions that come directly from the RFI. So they're asking about things like the cost drivers, the administrative burdens, you know, how can we improve the program? Yeah, you can see those there, but they're asking some real questions that are all aimed at cost and efficiencies for how they can improve the program. To me, that's a sign that the task force is really trying to look at serious change to the program. So,
sorry, I don't understand.
So they're trying to understand what is you know, possible things that could be undertaken. So they have this RFI open. I have the link there to the RFI if you're interested in giving a reply. I think what they're saying is that it should have like a summary opening page and be no more than 10 pages long. That's all the comments are due by middle of August. So that's something that you could consider, but they're going to get, you know, the feedback. Thoughts I've seen is hundreds of replies they're expecting, could be thousands, but they're going to take those into account in their review of giving recommendations when they give their final report in 60 days. So also, they're also announced, this is fairly new, in the first meeting of the Reform Task Force, they announced that they're also going to be having listening sessions. And we don't know very much about that yet, but basically they're going to be hosting these sessions. They may be inviting only certain people. They haven't said if it's going to be over the web, if it's going to be in person. They did say these are going to be held across the nation, so maybe they're regional. We don't really know yet, but they're going to have these listening sessions, and that'll give the task force a chance to drill in some more on some of the feedback they're getting from the RFI, but they're going to get feedback from different groups. It could be one thing I heard as a rumor is that they could have the sessions based on different groups in the industry. So maybe one listening group to hear the feedback from C3 PAOs, maybe one from small business, just different groups, but it's all conjecture. But basically, it's not just RFI feedback they're asking for, they're also asking for people to join these listening sessions and give the direct feedback and answer questions from the committee. Okay, let's go forward. Okay, so this is totally conjecture here, but I put together for you just so you can think about it a little bit. What are some of the kind of things that could be recommendations coming out of this task force? And there's a lot more possibilities that I listed here. But one of the things that seems like it's very possible is that you could require less contractors to be required to have a third-party certification. And on the right of that is another possibility. Could be greater reliance on self-assessments, which those two kind of go together. But you could have more people do self-assessments, less people need to go through the formal assessment. Another thing they could do is have some type of simplification for small business. Another one is more false claims activity, because that's a real, as we saw, the penalties on the other slide, that's something that can really impact your company. Could be reduced documentation requirements, and I think this one also sounds very likely, but we have a whole nother slide coming up about this. The important documentation, I really don't think would be changed. They're just looking for how could they reduce things that are just an administrative burden. And then another one listed here is that they could have more spot checks. If the DoD was having audit teams more frequently pop in on companies to check if their SPRS score is accurate, then there'd be another option for companies to stay on their toes to avoid any penalties from that. And that could also lead to a False Claims Act penalty. One other one I didn't list here, but I've heard since I made this slide, was that the DoD internally has issued a memo to their own staff. This is not for CMMC, but they've changed their policy that the mandatory CUI training is no longer going to be required annually. It's going to be required every 2 years. It's a small change, but that's one also to be more efficient, to have less time spent on training. All right, so I did mention reduction in documentation. I wanted to mention a little bit about what I was thinking there, because it's kind of unclear just to say reduction in documentation. But on the left, I list some things that are like, I think of as core documentation you really need. And the poster child is the system security plan. Without an SSP, that's kind of the guidebook about your whole program. So I don't see that going away. Plan of actions and milestones is basically just saying, if you don't have everything in place, what are you going to do about it? So that's not going to go away. Your asset inventory, your policies, these are like core operational documents that you really need to have a security program. But the documents that may be simplified or going away are ones related to really the third-party assessment, because those are things you're putting in place largely because you're going to be assessed. And if you're going to have some kind of lessened assessment or a self-assessment, you may not need to produce these documents. So that's just to get you think when people say reduction in documentation, it's really focused on those documents that you need for your third-party assessment. Next slide. All right, so just to we're getting into kind of the recap now, but on task to continue, you really should be focused on the primary tasks that are required operationally to meet the CMMC requirements. So we can assume that compliance with the baseline security controls for FCI, the controls for 800-171, those are going to remain in place. The only thing they're right now pausing on is the certification of that by a third party. So keep focused on getting those controls in place. Got some examples here of your user training, your incident response plans. These things on the left are things that are core documentation and the core task, getting controls in place. So these are things you're going to need. So keep spending your time focusing on those is just a great idea. Pausing, things to consider pausing. If the government may change who needs to have a third-party assessment, should you pause having a third-party assessment? That's what a lot of companies are thinking about. But keep in mind, that's what I have in the blue at the bottom. It's a real strong marketing opportunity if you get your third-party certification, because you are then on that short list of companies that have it, and some doors are going to open for you. So if you're almost there, you think you're ready, consider going ahead with your assessment for that marketing advantage. But if you're looking at you're not really ready for the assessment, or you may not need to do it in the future, that's something you could consider pausing at the current time and focus on those core controls.
Hey, Wayne. So I know that you work with a lot of C3 PAOs and clients. What are you seeing in the market? Are people pausing, or are they still head down steadfast? What are you seeing?
I haven't seen, from my conversations with the C3 PAOs, I haven't seen a real reduction in the assessments. If people are signed up for an assessment, if they're, feel they're fully ready for the assessment, they're on the books. I haven't heard of a lot of companies backing out of doing those assessments, because there is that strong, marketing edge you get by getting your assessment in place. So that's what I've seen mostly. It's more the companies that aren't quite ready, that were considering having their assessment, just to get it done before the mid-November date. They're the ones that are saying, well, let's wait and see what the committee comes back with, if the requirements change for us.
Excellent.
So on this slide, just key takeaways, but really the first few bullets here are really aimed at keep your focus, use this pause time as a time to really focus on any of the CMMC requirements that you don't have in place yet, those gaps, getting your gaps filled, because those requirements are going to stay. So anything you can do to get those controls in place are 100% in your benefit. The CMMC level 1 and level 2 self-assessments fully in place, nothing's changing at all. So if you don't have those all in place, get those in place, or verify. If you have an SPRS score, especially if you have a very high or 110 score and you're not 100% positive, re-verify your SPRS score. It's a great time to do that. And the thing a lot of people aren't thinking of, and I brought it up several times in this call, if you're a subcontractor, contact your prime and find out what their requirements are. Are they going to let you have a pause? Are they pushing ahead because they want to get their subcontractors all in place? But do reach out to your primes, because if you don't, You may still have a compliance date that you're unsure of, but just a quick call to them can help you understand, from their point of view, what you are allowed to do with the pause.
Excellent.
And that's all we have.
Perfect. Well, appreciate the insights there, Wayne. I want to thank everybody again for joining. We'll stay on for a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask Wayne, feel free to put them in there in the chat box. Like I said in the beginning, you will all be receiving a copy of this. And then we will also have our contact information in there as well. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, by all means, feel free to reach out. We do offer a snapshot meeting. So if you don't even know, where to start or where to begin, we do offer a free service to our partners and clients to just kind of talk through the situation and see how we can best support you and what a good path forward is. So again, want to thank everybody for joining today. We'll stay on for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. Thanks, everyone.